All right, good morning, everybody. Just as a reminder, I am recording today's meeting. Hopefully I'll remember to record it if we end up stopping for lunch. Just a couple housekeeping things. Looking ahead to our next meeting, which as of right now, planning on having on the 16th of November. We're going to have presentations from Ben Baker, who's leading the EV work group, John Borkowski, who's leading the electrification and energy storage work groups. And we're also going to have a presentation by Dan Hurley in the afternoon on Empower. So just to be prepared for that. And as of right now, I've got Fred Kelly from PPRP. He's leading the 100% RPS work group. That'll be right now scheduled for the 30th. All right. Thanks for everyone who submitted comments. There were a couple comments on the process moving forward. In my email, I guess it was on the Friday, October 20th, I had attempted to kind of give a very brief overview of where things stood in response to Mr. Bartlett's suggestion. I'm guessing that wasn't what folks were looking for, at least because Mr. Bartlett and OPC raised some issues with that. And OPC also had a concern of what the work group report is going to look like. In terms of how I'm planning to do the report, I'd recommend you look at another work group report I've done before. Probably just follow that same kind of format. Look at case number 9618. That was a multi-year rate plan work group. And unless something significantly changes, I'm planning on following that same kind of format, laying out what the issue is, where the parties landed, and what recommendations we have or decisions that the commission's going to have to make. One thing that the report is not going to include is directing the utilities to implement whatever changes we agree to, because I believe that's more in the vein of the commission directing the work group or directing utilities to do things. All we're going to be doing is recommending. So with that, anybody have any questions before we get moving? All right, and today it's got to be the last day for this block, just based on our schedule, and we spent a lot of time on this. And I know I think Mr. Verchinsky is correct. We were getting into the weeds, and especially with this block, I think he was correct. You know, we should be noting what it should or shouldn't be included, why or why not, and then moving on, rather than trying to figure out exactly the levels of detail in these bullets, which will hopefully be addressed at a later date. Does anybody agree or disagree with that? Or disagree, I should say. Okay. Oh, yes, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Judge, and thanks for the summary. Yeah, just in terms of block one, well, first, I very much appreciate your point that what we're developing is recommendations to the commission. We're not the commission, but in terms of the specifics, for example, on time horizons, I think that it's going to be important for us to at least nail down not just the fact that time horizons are important, but also the basic structure of the planning process in terms of those time horizons. So that level of detail, I think, is important. Maybe beyond that, and like specifying exact numbers of years or exact content of what happens at what level, that's probably beyond us. I agree.
Sure, and it sounds like everybody agrees time horizons should absolutely be included, but there's definitely some differences of opinion as to the lengths and the length of the periods, and I guess how often they should be, the plans should be conducted. Is that your understanding as well, Mr. Bartlett?
Yes, sir. I think that there was a general sense that there might be 3 levels, and that might be enough to agree on, and more or less the time frames, whether it's 15 or 20 or more than 10 or whatever for the longer term, whether it's 3 or 5, depending on the utility cycle, that's variable. I think everybody has annual plans anyway. So, I mean, if we can agree to that level of detail, then I think we can, that's it.
All right. Well, all right. We'll throw it out there to the utilities. Does everyone agree that, again, not talking about specific timeframes, but agree with the premise that we'll have 3 different planning horizons? I guess there'll be an annual, some kind of a midterm, and then a long-term plan.
I think that we need to leave that a little bit. Well, that's basically a good idea. I don't want to speak for all utilities, but different utilities have different diverse planning systems, and we need to respect that. So let's, before we agree to a central plan, let's allow the utilities to weigh in on how they do things now and what adaptation would take for them if there is any.
Well, it seems, I mean, again, very generally, it seems that, I mean, everyone's kind of doing that already. I know with BGE, Ethan, you guys have an annual, a 5-year, and then I know you have a 10-year budget and then a 15-year. Is that correct, sir?
Moving to a 15-year.
Moving to a 15. So right now you've got an annual, 5, and a 10.
Yes.
Okay. So that's kind of, I think that's kind of what Mr. Bartlett's talking about. Is that?
And I am in agreement with Mr. Bartlett up to the point where we just, my theme for the next few weeks is going to be utility diversity. So
yeah, and I'm not trying to lock anybody in on the same,
okay,
on the same thing, but it seems that everyone is doing this in some form or fashion currently. And it sounds like
yes,
most people want to continue to have it done, again, with some kind of an annual, some kind of a midterm. What that is, we can figure out later, and then some kind of a long-term plan. Agreed. Okay.
Just have to put my stake in the ground.
No, I got it. I get the whole diversity, and I don't think we're trying to lock anybody in on something right now that they're not already doing. All right. Anybody else? Julie, you turned your camera on. You want to weigh in? No. Okay. So, all right. You can keep it on if you like. It's fine. All right. Just me and Jacob right now. All right. So everybody's on board with annual, some type of a midterm, and some type of a long-term plan. Jacob, you look a little confused.
Well, I was just going to say, again, to Ethan's point of flexibility of short-term versus annual, just being cautious of that language.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that's fine. Okay. So short-term, does, I know Pepco and DPL, they do a 2-year and a 10-year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Plans. Okay. So is it, so you guys don't do an annual plan?
So those from the capacity planning team can feel free to correct me on this, but I believe, the evaluation is done annually, but the plans are put together on a short-term kind of 2-year plan, if that makes sense. If the forecasting is done annually, but the plans are put together for 2 years.
All right. I'm sorry. Could you try that one more time for me? And it might just be me.
It might be better. I see, Bob, I see you're on. Let you speak to that specifically.
We do a 10-year load forecast every year. So like this year, we're doing a 10-year forecast for the next 10 years. Then next year, we'll do it again and update it at a year. So we do it
Okay.
annually, but it's always 10 years out. And then we also do short-term planning studies on our feeders that look out based on our forecast, that look out 2 years.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. I think I got it. Thank you, sir. And do you guys do any kind of like midterm, like 5 to 6 year, any kind of planning?
I mean, it's captured in it's captured in our 10 years. I mean, it'd be lumping off the back 5 years. So, I mean, we look at the 5 years, but it's in our 10-year lookout.
Okay, so essentially you combine the two. All right. All right. Mr. Bartlett, did you have I'm sorry, caught you there mid-sip. No, okay, you're good. All right, you turned your camera on. I thought you'd want to say something. All right, so Dave, are you here from P? I thought I saw you log in earlier, sir.
Yeah, I'm here.
I know you guys do an annual and a 12-year plan. Do you guys do anything in the middle?
Well, we establish budgets on a 3-year cycle. So we're always looking out 3 years for that. And that would include our planning as well. So, if you want to consider that mid-year or mid-cycle, but I mean, overall, I'm good with that. We're looking at out at the 5-year horizon as well. So I think I'm okay with that.
Okay, so when you say you're looking at the 5-year horizon, but you're not filing any kind of report or anything currently?
No, we're not.
Okay. Is that something PE's open to, or?
Yeah,
I think that bridge later, but.
Yeah, I think we can look at doing that.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Anybody else want to be heard on time horizons?
So this is Adam with SMECO.
Sure.
Our planning cycles are usually a 10-year plan, which we evaluate every 5 years. And then we do a 3-year plan. We don't usually do an annual plan. We always have asset failures that we might need to replace, but we work with that within our budgeting cycle. I'm sorry,
Okay.
12 years, not 10 years.
Right. Okay. So you do a 3-year and a 12-year, but nothing that you do on an annual basis.
Not on an annual basis. Like for example, if we have a breaker that's failing, with the next budget year, we'll put that in there, but not from a planning perspective.
Okay. And is that something, obviously you guys have always done it that way. Is there a reason you guys haven't done that?
We're just very more intimate, and we're much a smaller system, right?
Okay.
Smaller group, smaller organization, and we're more, we know our system extremely intimately, right? So the need to put another plan together for annual is not really a necessity. It's usually 1 or 2 action items where a report or a document doesn't need to be created for an annual perspective.
Okay.
And the 3-year plan does a pretty good job outlining what those plans are over the next 3 years. So anything much sooner is just.
All right.
Not
is SMECO willing to consider something between the 3 and the 12-year?
Well, we do the 12-year plan every 6 years. So
Okay.
there is, so
Okay.
we reevaluate every 6 years of what is happening. What are the trends, how fast are they building early and how fast are they not building,
Okay.
houses and so on and so forth.
All right. So your 12-year plan is kind of like a mix between your midterm and your long term, kind of like Pepco and Delmarva. Is that fair to say? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Good. All right. Anybody else? Can we put this one to bed? All right. Excellent. All right. And
apologies, Judge McLean. Can I actually ask a question? So, assuming we're maybe close to an endpoint on time horizons, hopefully, do you have thoughts as to, and we'll happily look into case 9618, as you mentioned, but could you maybe provide an example of how you think, or you envision this like time horizons piece might look within the final report? That just might help us, you know, to understand structurally what this will look like.
Okay. Okay. So first block, we're talking about considerations, forecasts. I can't even read it. All right. Forecasting into types of projections. So this is my understanding of block one is, all right, should these 7 items be included in moving forward in the plans? So I would throw out everyone's position on that, on this issue. I would say that there's consensus on it, but there's a difference of opinion on the particular time frames that the different horizons or time horizons, and recommend that the commission continue to that these time horizons be included moving forward. I mean, I'm not sure what you're looking for here. I mean,
no, that helps. That helps.
Right. And like, if we didn't agree on it, I would say like, okay, Mr. Bartlett wants 70 planning horizons over 20 years, and Eli wants 40, but Jacob wants 1. And Doug Mike Heel wants no planning horizons. They want to do whatever they want to do. And then I would lay those out and say, all right, commission, you've got a lot of options. You got nothing, you got 1, you got 40, you got 70. So
great. No, that's very helpful. And so kind of the idea is to say, here are the opinions of the work group members. Here's where we landed on consensus, if we landed on consensus.
Yep.
And therefore, here are the potential paths going forward. Commission, please, direct
absolutely.
one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Okay.
what I've done is, I've labeled things previously as non-consensus, consensus, and then maybe sometimes when we agree, when everybody, because again, this is not, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm trying to stay out of it in terms of decisions other than procedural. If there's some general consensus, like we agree on some things but not everything, that I'll try and label it that way. But like I said at the beginning, everybody will have an opportunity to take a look at whatever draft before I file and offer some suggestions and edits.
Excellent.
Before it gets filed. And the same thing with the interim report, which is due mid-January, but I see that more as kind of a brief overview, but I'm more than happy to let everyone have a look at that before I file it as well.
Great. Nope, that was exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
I just wanted to, get an understanding of what the structure might look like. So
Okay.
that was very helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know they're all different, and everybody does them a little bit differently. So
That's exactly the purpose of my question.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Eli, for the question, and thank you, Judge, for that response. It's very helpful. I would just maybe not label this as a disagreement, but rather I think there's consensus about the reasonable intervals, and they vary. Picking up on Ethan's theme, they vary by utility, and that the commission would want to accept and respect that difference in the way the utilities are already cycled. But at the same time, there's general consensus that these different levels would be useful. So it's not really a non-consensus item as much as it is adaptation to the utilities' existing cycles.
Sure, yeah, and that's something I'll definitely throw in there. And I'm sure if I don't, Ethan will be the first one to say, hey, we got to be diverse. Not everybody's the same, different systems. So no, I fully recognize and appreciate that, sir. So that'll, if that doesn't go right under that first bullet, I'm sure it'll probably be in the preamble of the report.
Guilty as charged, Your Honor.
No, it's fine. I'm just picking on you. All right, and Jacob, your camera's on. Remind me to come back to the vision statement, because I know that's still out there. I wanted to start with that, but we're rolling, and I don't want to lose what steam we have right now. All right. Levels of granularity. Again, everyone seems like this should be included. Obviously, there's a difference of what level of granularity there should be. I don't know how deep we need to go on this in terms of the analysis that needs to be provided or needs to be conducted, I should say. Yes, Mr. Verchinsky.
Yeah, I think the only question we need to ask is, do we need levels of granularity? And I think the general consensus is yes, we do. We can all differ, I think, on what those levels might be, but I think that's a discussion for another day. At least in my opinion. You're going to have to get into more specificity into these plans than what I see in the existing 10-year plan that's out there right now, from the standpoint that it's basically a load forecast and it doesn't provide very much more information. And so that's my opinion for whatever it's worth.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I literally just remembered that I had wanted to start with the straw man. So let's go with granularity. Ethan or Jacob, I apologize. I think you had asked to lead with that, and it slipped my mind. I apologize. All right. Anybody disagree with Mr. Verchinsky? Yes, Mr. Cathan.
It's actually Cathan, by the way.
My apologies, sir.
No worries, no worries. Everybody makes the same mistake. So it's more of a question. I'm going to do. I read the Joint Exelon reply comments, and this is really a question for all of the utilities, because I keep seeing in terms of lack of data on DERs, so therefore they can only do net forecasting. And the question is, and this is a broader question I've been wanting to know in general, don't the utilities have information on every DER? You know, in my understanding, I have rooftop solar. I had to sign an interconnection agreement with Pepco. And so that information is sitting in Pepco's files somewhere. Why is there not that seems to be, should be a core set of data that should be part of any distribution planning. So I'm just curious, what is, what's the status? What is the activities being done in order to improve the access to that data?
Not seeing, let me see if I can raise any of our first capacity planning people to speak to that.
Good morning, everyone.
There we go.
Ethan, you're trouble, man. This is Eric with Eric Henlon with the Baltimore BG team. Just to see if I can respond to the question in regards to let's say residential rooftop solar, right? And having a net meter there. Yes, the utility is aware of the premise, the residence that has the solar. The issue or things that we are trying to work through right now is we have a net meter that does not tell us what's the production of that solar. What it tells us is how much power or energy is moving through that point of interconnection, right? So we do not know exactly what's the load behind the meter and what's the contribution of the PV at that instance of time. We do not have access to that data. Your solar company may have access to that data, but the utility does not have access to that data. Yes, we may be looking at some new solutions, some new technologies to help infer what that contribution is. We're not there yet, right? I'll give you an example, right, of my experience in a different state. Is usually when you have PV installed, there are 2 meters. You have a net meter at the point of interconnection. You also have a production meter. That's a separate meter that actually measures what's the contribution of that solar system at a given point in time. And that way, that gives the utility much more awareness and visibility on what's going on behind the meter from a PV perspective. Unfortunately, that is not the framework we have in Maryland, right? We're working through it. We're looking at different ways that we can get that information, right? But with the systems that we've had in place for years, right? Unless we were measuring that data, we don't have access to what the contribution is today. Hope that provides some clarity.
It does. It is helpful. Thank you for that. But my question is, I totally understand your point about the operational data and what is the generation coming and what is the load, unknown load at the premise. But isn't this distribution planning? Isn't this looking forward? And so what is, you're referring to is the amount of input or injection that's happening when we're looking, if you're looking 3, 5, or 10 years in advance, you would not need to have a actual visibility on how much is operational in any particular day. And you would be able to have to do estimates anyways on how much would be the underlying load and perhaps the amount of DER. So just a question on, I take your point, but I'm just wondering, is there any plans to at least identify what types of resources, because all the interconnection agreements have to say what kind of inverter is, what the size of the resource, etc.
So like anything else, right? We don't want to, set expectations that we don't meet, right? So are we doing something about that? And the answer is yes, right? We don't want to overpromise, under-deliver. So we're actually looking at how we can start gathering that data, right? And yes, we are aware of where the locations are. When you think back when we started on this journey initially, capturing the type of inverter and things of that nature, we weren't capturing that data, right? As we evolve, as we learn, we're capturing more data, and we got to integrate that into our processes, but it's going to take time.
Okay. All right. Eli makes a good point. I think we're getting the weeds. This has just been an outstanding question of mine. And just one final plug. There is an activity called the DER registry that's being developed nationwide in order to provide and assist utilities on this issue. So I'll stop asking the question. It's just been an open question I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Sarah, if it's okay from SMECO's perspective, we can respond in a perspective of how we look at DERs.
No, please. I was coming to you next.
Yeah. So, it's difficult because DERs, they have their output, right? But at the end of the day, from a distribution system planning, we have to provide 120 volts every day, every night. And, we look at the diversified load when we look at a feeder perspective. Mr. David, you might have a DER, your neighbor might not. But, when we plan in the forecast, we want to make sure that we have sufficient capacity to feed both your house, Mr. David, and as well as your neighbors, right? And that's why DER forecasting is a little difficult. And also, we don't have much control on that. For example, Tesla or whoever may have came and decided to install it on you. Your neighbor might decide not to have it. So we can't forecast the inevitable of what is going to happen. It's interesting because you look at CNBC, they're saying EV sales are slowing down. We're everybody's expecting this is going to expand. So you don't know what the market condition is going to do. But what we do know is where new home construction is happening, because it's a long, lengthy process to get approvals through counties to build a new subdivision. Also, the other thing is we do have a managed power portfolio. So we need to make sure that our power portfolio and procurement is sufficient to supply the demand for the utility. There is no storage where we can store like a water tank, without investment for a battery storage at this time. So it's making sure we manage that power portfolio correctly to ensure that we have sufficient capacity when you need it on the hot summer day or 6 a.m. in the middle of December.
Thank you, sir. We'll go Mr. Bartlett, then Eli, and then Jorge.
Oh, could let Eli and Jorge go first. I just had a reflection back on Paul's comment. But
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief. And I think we're bringing up what are excellent points, and I do think this work group does need to tackle. But I just wanted to note that one of the future Jade boxes, and I put the Jade website in the chat in case that's helpful for folks. But one of the future Jade boxes focuses explicitly on DER forecasting, and there's a future load forecasting one as well. Here, my understanding of what we're really trying to get into is the considerations that feed into utility projections. And so what we're talking about here is the expected level of granularity needed by the utilities for this projections analysis. And what is clarified in that link that I sent, if you look in the text that is within it, it adds that spatial and temporal in parentheses. And I put that in the chat. And I think that's an important piece that's just missing in the bullet and is explained in the text associated with the bullet. And so just want to make clear that, again, I think this is a good conversation, but I think what we're really trying to get at here is better understanding of what level of detail the utilities develop their projections spatially and temporally, not kind of in the weeds about how they are able or not able to utilize DER or leverage DER within planning. Again, a very important topic, no doubt about that, but I think that comes in upcoming box. And so I would recommend just generally that we kind of focus on that spatial and temporal piece here, just to, wrap up this box to the extent we can.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eli. Jorge.
Good morning, folks. Listen, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing the issue of other states in regards to the production meter. I just want to encourage everybody to try to find a path to integrate technologies that are already on the grid. And we have been hearing the issue of the utility needs an instrument that they can trust in regards to do their planning activities. But I want to encourage everybody to explore why it is that we are looking into ways to do better distribution planning, which is to integrate those sensors that are already on the grid. Those are the inverters that have a significant amount of data that could be used for planning purposes. So it's an item that's been underutilized by the utilities for planning purposes. And I will encourage you, as we move into this working group, to see what it is that we can do to incorporate the data provided by these devices, because they're already on the grid. I mean, we have been hearing about this same topic when we started the Maxis almost 7-8 years ago, that it's hard for the utility to trust a device that they don't have under the control. But the reality is that third-party developers are interconnecting to the grid through this device. Let's leverage the data that right now they're being pulling that is being underutilized, and we need to come up with some kind of framework to use it for planning purposes.
All right. Thank you, sir. We'll go Eric and then Ethan. Eric? You had your hand up, sir?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, thank you. Just want to pull on that string that Jorge shared in regards to access to production data from inverters, right? Today, those inverters are not utility owned, right? Utilities have no access to those inverters, right? And those usually access to those inverters are specific to either the manufacturers or the developers, right? And it's not just PV. You're going to see the same things on EV chargers. We're going to see the same thing on storage and things of that nature. It's who owns the data, right? And Maryland doesn't have any rules or guidance of those data being accessible by different organizations, as in, just let me pick on Sunrun for a minute, right? Sunrun develops and deploys a bunch of PVs out there, right? That's their data, right? We don't have any guidance, anything out there that says Sunrun has to share that data with the utilities for us to be able to integrate that data into our planning process, right? So it's some of the hurdles that we have today, right? Open to discussion and how we can move that along, but we've got to identify that's a hurdle, and that data belongs to Sunrun, and it's not accessible to the utilities.
That is correct. No, that is correct. I'm so sorry. Because I think it's straight up, I think this may add to Eric's saying. So the data belongs to Sunrun, or does the data belongs to the customer?
That's a very good question. I'll leave that conversation between the customer and Sunrun, but I know it's not the utilities, and the utilities do not have access to it.
Okay.
This is Adam from Smeco. I did want to make a comment to this. It is difficult because, yes, do we have a roadmap to start looking into more detail of what DER means? But it's also a lot more data, right? And it's the same thing like driving your car down the road. How much data do you want to look at when you're driving down the road? Do you want to know what your brake pressure fluid is when you apply for the brake, what the speed sensors, all the telemetry that you have within your vehicle? Do you want to know that much level of detail, or do you want to take a look at the detail that you have for your worst case scenario, or the light load or heavy load? So it's a balance of how much data, because sometimes too much data can be too much data, and you can make the wrong decision with too much data. And at the end of the day, the utility shows up at the PSC to respond to poor performance, right? So I think it's a very balancing act of how much data you have, how does the data get fed into the utility, and utilities do have plans to start incorporating DER management tools, but we also have some other objectives that we're trying to incorporate as well to make sure that we have a solidified system managing tool.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bartlett, and then Samantha.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. I actually just wanted to circle back to Paul Verchinsky's original point, which is that I think we agree that the level of granularity will be different for different components of the map as we move forward. And this is this discussion we're having on DERs is a perfect example of that. I think what he was suggesting is that we wait until we get to each component and then have the discussion there. And that it really reflects back. I think maybe what we need to put in is that there is certain data that for the kind of planning we envision, the utilities would need or would ideally have. In some cases, those data are available. In some cases, they may not be. But to Eric's point, if the data are out there, but they're someone else's, is that something we should take on as an issue? But the real issues are going to be the availability of the data, the feasibility of getting the data, or either having it or getting it. and how it's used to evaluate either the plan or for key stakeholders who have to interact with the grid, their ability to understand what's being planned and what is actually happening in terms of reporting. So each of these items, as we go through these boxes, whether it's DERs or EVs or hosting capacity or whatever, we're going to have this discussion. And I think it would be good to come out of that discussion with some key points about what's available, what could be available, how it might be obtained, and so on. We've kind of gotten off on the DER particular aspect of it right here, but I think we're a little bit ahead of ourselves. And I think that's what Paul was trying to say, is so we'll do it as we move, and the level of granularity will be determined by what's needed and what can be available.
Good point, Mr. Bartlett. Samantha.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to chime in here on the DER forecasting piece, partly because I think this is a really important component of proactive distribution system planning, and it's something that's a gap right now in the state of Maryland. And you all may have seen in CCSA's comments on the technical conference coming up that we recommended that this be a topic of discussion for those technical conferences. I think a number of other folks said the same thing. So I wanted to maybe recommend that, I think as others already have, that we kind of put a pin in this for now, because it'll definitely come up later in the JADE process map steps. But for what it's worth, I wanted to chime in to say that I personally work all across the country on these issues. I think a number of other folks on the call do as well. And in states that have requirements for utilities to do distribution system planning, almost all of them require almost all utilities there do or create a DER forecast. And the reason I bring that up is that there are common practices, best practices, established sort of proven methodologies and software tools that are available to do the DER forecasting piece. So again, I think this is all a great potential topic for a technical conference. Point being that I recognize that this isn't done today. I recognize it's new and it's challenging, but it is done across the country, and I think it can be done here. Thanks.
Thank you, Samantha. And just, do you have an idea in response to, I think it was Mr. Cathan's question, as to who actually owns the data from like a solar facility? Is it the customer? Is it the supplier?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I mean, my sense of the way the forecasting process works is it often doesn't require a bottoms up understanding of individual solar system data. It's often sort of a more top-down process. So I can speak to California, for example, where there's a state agency that creates a statewide forecast of DER growth, and utilities take that and based on a agreed upon methodology, sort of disaggregate it and extrapolate it down to the feeder level and publish that information. And so that's one example of how this can be done. So there's top-down methodologies. I'm sure there are bottoms-up approaches as well. I think there are a lot of software companies out there these days that specialize in that, using more like predictive analytics, not necessarily requiring customer or solar data. That's my understanding. Others on the call might have, a more supplemental information there. Thanks.
So in short, you can get around it without actually having the information.
Yes, sir.
And in California, if the forecasts are wrong, they can just blame the state. Sounds like, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
That's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And I think that's what's important, is that everyone sort of agreed that, all forecasts are wrong, right?
Sure.
That's the joke everybody makes. All forecasts are wrong. Some are useful. So I think it's just a matter of agreeing on what's the acceptable methodology that, the commission can bless and say, yes, we know this will be wrong, but we accept that this is the least bad version of how to do this.
All right. Thank you. All right, Eric.
Yes, thank you, Judge. I'd just like to pull on a string, and it's a little bit of a concern of mine as we work through these blocks. And I went through the JADE roadmap document that I'm concerned about. One is I I'm not sure if when the JADE roadmaps were developed, they were intended for us to go through them block by block like this. If you look at I'm you know, just reviewing the document that was shared in the chat. I know we focus on the process map that's on page 5, but if you move into the subsequent pages, you'll see that, pardon me, you'll see that the blocks are really intended to be spoken to in a group, right? And just a concern with us, or a suggestion, right? Should we be looking at these blocks in a group? Like, one is to establish assumptions and identify objectives, and it's the blocks that are in pink and yellow there, and then the next one is around develop forecasts, and then you look at the DER forecast and things. If we're going to be moving through the JADE roadmap like this, should we be looking block by block or group by group? Just something I want to get out there. And secondly, to Ms. Weaver, to your question, Judge, is if the data is being collected, right, by the developers, or who owns it? Is it the customer or the company who's collecting the data? I'm not sure if we got a response to that.
Go ahead, Samantha.
I apologize. I can't unmute myself, and I missed the second half of the question.
All right.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Eric?
Yes, I was just reiterating the question you asked earlier, Judge McLean, right? Who owns the data, right? Is it the developer or the customer that owns the data that's being collected?
So to be clear, I was referring to data that is created by state agencies, not customers or anyone else, and that isn't directly derived from customer or solar system data. And I don't know who owns it.
Right.
I was just speaking to how, examples of how I've seen forecasting done in other states. And I think my point was that it doesn't necessarily rely on individual customer related data.
Ronald weighed in on the chat, and he believes it's the smart inverter data is customer data. So, all right. Eric, in follow up to yours, should we be doing these in a series of blocks? I mean, we're going to have to, just based on the time. We just took block 1 as kind of the starting point, but we're definitely going to have to take multiple blocks at a time here. Either the next for the next meeting, or the ones following right after that, because we just don't have time to dedicate a month or two to each individual block. And I don't know if that's the best way to do it or not, but it's kind of what we've got. All right, so to circle back to Mr. Burchinsky's and Mr. Bartlett's comments, and to kind of try and put this to bed, is everyone on board with the levels of granularity that they're going to be different? They're going to be different for different items, different for different utilities. Samantha, you have your hand up.
Sorry about that. No, I'm sorry. It's I've got a kid at home, and it's a little chaotic on my end. I apologize.
No apology necessary. All right. All right. I'm seeing some thumbs up on this, so we can move on. All right. Okay, so I think we're making some progress. I'm not sure, making good time. I'm not sure where we're going though. All right. I'd like to go back. I apologize about this, but let's go back to the vision statement of the utilities that they threw out there. I think there'll probably be some overlap in some of the bullets. It may help or hinder the discussion a little bit. But Jacob, Ethan, do you guys want to go through the vision statement? Or is it the straw man?
Straw man.
My apologies. And again, I apologize for not leading off with this.
No worries. Let me try and set up, and I can share my screen. Let me just find the one out of a million windows that I have open right now.
I just added you as a co-host, so.
Okay.
All right, great.
Hopefully everyone's able to see it.
Yep.
Okay, so just to give some background on this, as we've heard from discussions from previous phases, as well as some discussions that have been happening so far around block 1. There's been a lot of kind of discussion around time horizons, extending time horizons further out to really look at some of those policy informed forecasting, and wanting to really kind of, I think Al used the term kind of laying out kind of what that roadmap looks like in terms of, putting together what it looks like to achieve the goals and doing some of that scenario analysis and really understanding, trying to drive towards that transparent stakeholder participation and incorporating some of that key feedback. And so all of that kind of informed as we started to think about what does that start to look like? And so that's where this kind of proposal, this proposed straw man is coming from. And so we kind of want to talk through that with the working group today, work with all the utilities within Maryland to kind of pull this together and kind of put together a consensus straw man that, works with the utilities and, keeps flexibility in there, as Ethan highlighted earlier. Before we go to the next slide, Ethan, is there anything else that you would like to highlight at the beginning?
I'd just like for everyone to understand that this is very much a framework, a straw man. We wanted to build something that illustrated where the utilities could bring in stakeholder input and generate long-term views of where we are going as far as adoption of climate goals, and then bring that into a system, that a cycle that would repeatedly bring in stakeholder input, allow us to inform our distribution system plans that we would then bring forward for people's comment, and do that cyclically. And that, if you look at it, is actually, if you look at the JADE roadmap as a process that goes from start to finish and then goes back to the start, that was what we were trying to model this after. So, think of this as a long-term process to inform short-term planning. And we're looking for you to help us fill in a lot of the blanks. This is just the beginning of the coloring book. We can put in a lot of colors as we go. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. So I believe Dave Bedard, you'll be presenting the next slide. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yep. Okay, and do you guys want questions as you go, or you want to hold until the end?
I'm okay with questions as we go. I think, especially as we start to get in some of the slides, is really looking for a discussion with the working group. So,
right. Excellent. Thank you.
Sure. So this slide is just a summary of the principles, and just kind of the overall is, we're balancing in these principles Maryland's energy goals, commission requirements, stakeholder interests, and while maintaining, ultimately, utilities are responsible for the distribution planning processes. The first principle, utilities remain the principal parties responsible for planning the distribution system, but we do want to incorporate the state's goals. We want to define stakeholder roles and responsibilities and get that input. Overall arching, we want to increase transparency into the distribution system planning projects and programs, promoting the goals of the JADE roadmap. We need to retain utility flexibility and nimbleness in the distribution system planning decision-making process. There are items in that come up on the fly that we need to be able to respond to. We want to have discrete points for stakeholder feedback and input into that long-term planning process. And last, we want to avoid overly restrictive rules that might undermine the utilities' core obligations. Just remembering that utilities are responsible to their customers based on Maryland code. And I think Smeko was next.
Dave, I thought you had the next slide actually, and then I was.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was when you said the first two, I was actually thinking it was the first slide. Okay. Proposed solution, long-term analysis, long-term stakeholder informed analysis that incorporates feedback, identifies solution based on policy and legislative consideration, creates transparency and informs utility planning. Some key questions here. What should be included in the scenarios? How frequently should analysis be performed? What is the form of stakeholder input, and what data is included in the resulting publication? Any questions about that?
Oh, yep, go ahead,
Sure.
Samantha.
Thank you. Just can you clarify what is being analyzed here? I think that was my question looking through these slides. Is maybe it's obvious, but I'm looking back at the principles, for example, and it's not clear to me, like in this straw person proposal, what you see the goals of this effort being, or what data is being collected or analyzed here. Thanks.
Good.
Hey, Samantha, I can speak a little to that. We wanted to incorporate the state goals. We want to be able to see how people are moving towards them. This long-term analysis would allow us a check of, what kind of EV adoption are we seeing? What kind of DER adoption? It's a policy-based forecast, and it would help us to inform our more tight-end load forecasting. But we also want to get more information from you about what you think we should be incorporating. This is, if you think of this process as a cyclical process, this is cycle one, and right now we are collecting the first round of information about what our stakeholders want. So, like I said, this is very much a framework, and we're hoping you will help us flesh it out. And a lot of the discussion around JADE has already done that, but we're coming at this from the top down rather than the bottom up. So hopefully we can meet in the middle. Does that help?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess I want to, I want you to go through the rest of these slides here, but my initial thinking or initial gut reaction to this is this just feels like a big step backwards, in part because, at the first meeting of this work group relaunch, maybe it was the second meeting, I don't know. I thought we all kind of agreed to walk through the JADE process map. And I think most of us here agree that the JADE process map is a good framework to be using. And I'm trying to understand, is this straw person proposal intended to be an alternative to JADE, or how is it fundamentally different from JADE? I see there's a lot of similarity here. So I'm trying to understand kind of what the end game is with this.
The end game. The end game is to create a cyclical process. The JADE is a little vague, and sometimes, while this definitely follows JADE, you can take these steps and run them through JADE, do a cross comparison. We wanted to show how this would work just in an actual proceeding, in an actual, the real world example. JADE is idealized. We wanted to move this into something a little more concrete. And it's not meant to in any way, it is meant to complement the JADE process. I believe we agreed that we would have a parallel conversation and CSNA goals versus JADE. And this is a little more based in the Maryland goals and what we need to be doing to put forward how Maryland goes. But we also incorporate in the idea that we would be reporting on our process results, our processes towards the JADE goals as well as the CSNA goals as part of this.
Hey, can I ask a quick? Oh, go ahead, Eli.
Yeah. Thank you. And I was going to just second Samantha's points. I think that makes sense. You know, if I recall correctly, when we decided that this work group would go about using the JADE roadmap, we decided to dive right into the considerations feeding into types of projection box and forego the first two boxes. And if you look at that website, the very first two boxes are develop guidance or rules for the whole process and define proper stakeholder engagement opportunities, designate ultimate decision maker. And I think we made a conscious decision to come back to those boxes later, not to forego them entirely, but to start with the projections box. And then at the end of this, kind of come back to understand how this could all be incorporated into, like an annual type of DSP process that involves some type of filings and or technical conference, et cetera. And I think the JADE framework still has those components. And I guess I'm inclined to agree with Samantha and think and view this, at least as of this moment, as being, I think, duplicative of JADE. And I'm just not feeling clear on how, utilizing this would provide anything incremental to what going through the JADE map will allow us to do.
Yeah, so to add some clarity, I don't think we're looking here necessarily to replace the JADE process map or replace the discussions around that process map and DSP in general. What we're really trying to drive towards with this is a tangible, specific evolution of distribution system planning, and by having an evolution that goes in addition to what's being done it's driving towards adding this long-term analysis piece that is more of that forward-thinking, forward policy-driven, stakeholder feedback informed analysis that's done, in that longer time horizon that then feeds into the rest of the distribution system planning, right? This isn't replacing those short and long-term plans that we discussed before, but this is really driving towards gathering some of that information, as Ethan talked about earlier, on a cyclical way that then starts to inform the rest of the distribution system planning, right? So I don't think, we're presenting this as replacing, DSP with just this straw specifically, but presenting this as a tangible, specific solution that can be implemented within the DSP process that starts to evolve it in a way that starts to incorporate and meet the needs of the CSNA goals that are outlined and meet the needs of what the commission's looking for the work group to do. So this is really driving towards, a tangible evolution of the distribution system planning process.
Also, I'd like to note that we actually said that we were going to put this forward before the OPC proposal to follow JADE was made. This is something that we've been working on for quite a while, and we brought together the utilities to talk to each other about how we felt we could meet the goals of this distribution system planning work group. We hope that you will hear us out and understand that we are looking for your input here, and that this is not in any way trying to derail the current conversation. This is where we got to when we had these conversations among ourselves, and we hope that you can join that conversation. Let's go ahead with the slide.
Yep, the next slide starts talking through these steps, and I'll turn it over to Damon.
He's either frozen or sitting very still. Damon, you with us? Can't hear you if you are. All right, we'll just give him a second. And just so everybody's on the same page, in terms of what Eli indicated, developing the guidance or rules for the whole process, I envision that is essentially the regulations that are going to follow whatever the commission decides in this. And then in terms of stakeholder engagement, I think we had agreed that we're going to be talking about that throughout the process.
Okay, we seem to have lost Damon, so I'll pick up here.
Okay.
First of our key questions was the kind of data what kind of data should be collected for the long-term analysis.
Can you hear me now, Ethan?
Oh, okay. Damon's back. Welcome back, Damon.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know why my computer just blanked out there. Can you see me, or you can't see me probably, which is, you're not missing anything out there, but let's see. Okay. Can you hear me okay though?
We got you.
Okay. Let me just stick with voice for now. So Damon Krieger from Smecco. So let me move to the actual meat of the framework here. And I do just sort of piggyback on some of the other conversations. Really the goal here is to put JADE into action. And so these are just the preliminary steps for trying to accomplish just that. And so as we sort of think about data collection, our electric distribution systems were built over many, many, many decades. Many of us are 100+ years old. And so stakeholder feedback undoubtedly will also build over time, along when you think about data, the validity of the data being collected to support the actual decision-making within the distribution system planning process. And decision-making that I think we all want to stress that if not done correctly, will lead to increased costs, higher rates, which are ultimately to the substantial detriment of all of our customers. And also assume the presence of capacity resources that do not actually materialize when required. So each step of this process proposal will certainly evolve over time. The problem statement itself will change. What we're trying to influence through the planning process will change. And right now, again, we're trying to just put a basic framework on paper. I'm not going to drain the slide here, but I do want to hit on a couple key points. So when you think about data collection, it's really driving at what our customers need and want. And need and want are not necessarily the same thing. And then sort of where we go from there is how the system should be planned to meet those needs and wants. When you look at the specific type of data that should be collected, let me sort of go down. I think the first couple of bullets are somewhat self-explanatory, but when you get to trends, I think that one we need to be careful about, because this doesn't mean planning the system in response to the latest startup company, the sort of the flavor of the day. And particularly when you think about a company that comes in and wants us to build out a system at customer expense to address unproven technology. Trends develop over time. And that's why sifting through the data is so important. And at the end of the day, really the proper role of the utility in terms of sifting through that data, evaluating its validity over a long-term horizon. Not listed here is a phrase I think we throw around quite a bit, lessons learned. And that's an important component of the data collection, learning from other utilities and jurisdictions. It's an important point. I think we want to move away from best practices. And I think a theme you'll sort of hear throughout the framework presentation is that best practices can be somewhat of a loaded term, because what is best for one utility might not be best for another utility. It's this whole notion of one size does not fit all. And speaking from a cooperative, a nonprofit cooperative perspective, as I think Adam sort of indicated to the group before, our system is different. It's smaller. The customer characteristics are different. The system components are different. So the types of data that will be collected, there will certainly be commonalities throughout the utilities in the state, but there will be differences. And it's important to recognize those differences and not plan to a standard that just for the purpose of consistency across the board. So in terms of the second, collecting data to determine the needs and wants of our customers, there are lots of different ways to collect data, and these are just a few of them. When you can think about issuing requests for information, stakeholder meetings, surveys, focus groups. Some of the utilities have customer focus groups or other stakeholder focus groups, coordinating meetings with federal, state, local government officials, industry groups. And then the one I certainly want to highlight from Smecco's perspective is our cooperative board of directors. For those that aren't aware, we have a democratic election process by which our customers elect the members of the board, of which are customer members. So in Smeco's case, our customers literally tell us what to do. And so we have that direct feedback coming from the customers that influence what we do in all respects, including the planning process. And so with that, the last sort of pillar here, scenario development. Really, I think the goal here is to get on paper, start to incorporate in the scenario development the outputs of other work streams that are in progress at the commission, starting from work streams such as the electrification work group, the interconnection work group. There's just a lot that's going on. How do we bring that all together in terms of developing standards? And there's certainly scenarios, and there's certainly a baseline, the business as usual. And I think that probably links back to this notion of needs versus wants. The needs being keeping the lights on. What's our baseline? And how do we then build up there to ultimately get to a situation where we're thinking through full electrification? If we go to the next slide, Jay.
Hey, Damon, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
In terms of the data collection, is there an idea as to when that data should be collected in advance of the issuance of your forecasts?
So I think that's sort of the exact timing is an open question. I do think it's sort of your question, Your Honor, feeds into the next slide.
Okay.
When you think about process.
Okay.
So I'll jump right, just to answer your question, I'll jump down to the sort of the second bullet, which is under the considerations on the alignments, inputs and assumptions slide. Empower actually has a pretty good process in place when you think about collecting data for consideration. So in the Empower proceeding, there is a technical planning process, a technical conference, at which point stakeholders are invited to share their ideas, their proposals that the utilities have to sit back and listen to. And then the utilities have to reflect upon each of those proposals and either incorporate it into their plan or reject it. And in each case, they have to be explained to the commission as part of the upcoming planning cycle. And so you could imagine, you can envision a similar process playing out here, where there are points of time, and it could be, whether it's at that sort of if we have a sort of a 3-phase planning process, you could have sort of technical input points along the way that allows all of the stakeholders to provide their thoughts as to what should be incorporated into the actual planning process. And that could go both with respect to the data gathering, but also with respect to developing the assumptions that then should be incorporated into the planning process itself. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a one-stop, one point in time. Data collection is certainly, one would hope that all utilities are trying to collect the best data available at any given point in time. And so there could be periodic issuances of surveys. There could be a regular forum for receiving that input that just stands live in real time throughout the year, each and every day, to just make sure that we're getting that data from our customers. And again, we're all going to have slight differences here. As I mentioned with Smeco, we're getting that data at every board meeting every month. And so we get that in real time. Did that answer your question, Your Honor?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess it's just sort of hit on some other aspects of this second slide here, the second step, aligning inputs and assumption. Certainly one important point is the sort of the form of stakeholder input, and then frankly, who are the appropriate stakeholders for participating in this conversation? That needs to be aligned on as well. One can imagine it getting out of hand if stakeholder groups aren't organized in a way where the data can be collected and then funneled to the utilities in a meaningful, workable way. If we're getting it from 500 resources and sort of you could group them in groups of 100 each, certainly that would be more manageable if it could be filtered down. So I think that's important. Otherwise, a lot of the comments, the input may get lost, and that we certainly don't want any comments to get lost. So the funneling of the data is important as well. But again, I'll circle back. I think there is a lot in place from a process perspective that exists within the Empower construct that we might learn from. And so I do think that's an important takeaway from this this particular slide. So with that, I think I have to pass the baton on. Is it to Ethan next, I believe, or Jacob?
I'll be taking it. Thanks, David. So step 3 in the long-term analysis is then running that analysis. Taking everything that we've heard from the input data from the stakeholders, identifying and taking those assumptions and doing that analysis and that forecast, and recognizing that this is a long-term analysis as we're looking out, beyond where utilities are now, and kind of extending that, recognizing what is the appropriate frequency when you're looking that far out, right? Year to year, things don't change as much. And so what is that appropriate time horizon, frequency in which you're kind of doing this long-term analysis, recognizing it's important to have those conversations with stakeholders, work through things like a technical conference potentially to align on those assumptions. As you're building that roadmap, what is that kind of appropriate frequency? And then what is the output then of this analysis? Obviously looking towards what's the projected load growth, at a broader level when you're looking that far out, what are some potential system solutions? Obviously at that long-term horizon, they're going to be very conceptual and broad. And importantly, also discussing too, when making those investments or when you're looking and considering those potential solutions for the system, what are some of those additional investments that are needed to really enable those system solutions to operate successfully, whether it's IT investments, cybersecurity investments, or communications investments that go with that. As well as potentially identifying any kind of specific customer programs that could then also support the state goals. So this is really the step where you're doing the actual forecasting that load growth, projecting that load growth, and developing that based on all the input that we've gotten from the policy goals, from having conversations with customers, with stakeholders, and where things were aligned from the previous steps. Step 4 then is sharing those results, right? The whole intent here is transparent stakeholder participation. So after the utilities would perform this analysis that was stakeholder informed and informed by the policy goals, this would be shared in some capacity. Obviously, questions want to talk through with this working group of what would be included in that published plan, and come to consensus around defining what would be going into that plan. So it gives the stakeholders opportunities to see what the utilities are forecasting there and projecting there, and give them the opportunity to provide that stakeholder feedback that we've all talked about, whether it's through filing comments or a technical conference, whatever that may look like. But giving stakeholders then that opportunity to review the long-term analysis that's been put out there, provide their feedback, provide their comments on the analysis, that then the utilities are able to take that information and really incorporate that take that feedback and incorporate it into the planning, which ultimately is step 5 is as a result of performing this analysis and publishing it for stakeholders, we're getting that feedback and we're taking that feedback into account as we start to develop the next distribution planning cycle. And as Ethan mentioned, it's really a cyclical thing, and the more that we're doing this, the more that we're hearing from stakeholders and having that conversation. And so by performing this long-term analysis and getting that feedback, we're able to then kind of consider that within the distribution planning. So I'll pause there for questions around kind of the long-term analysis and what the utilities are looking to tangibly implement within distribution system planning as a way to address the considerations for longer time horizons, policy informed planning, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder feedback.
Okay. Jacob, I'll jump in with just one quick question. And it's utilities are strictly focused on the long-term analysis, not so much as, I guess, just from a stakeholder perspective. Are stakeholders going to be able to weigh in on the midterm plans that utilities do, or are we strictly talking long-term?
What's here, I'll say, is looking at a long-term analysis and evolving it in that capacity, right? Because I think, the more information and feedback we get early in the process, the more it can actually inform, where we drive processes and results, right? And so that's what this specifically is focused on, is identifying and creating that space in that long-term area to really have that conversation early on. And, because the earlier we get any of that information, the earlier we get that feedback, the more it's able to be incorporated.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, any questions for the utility? First of all, thanks for putting this together. I know I appreciate it. Anybody else? Yes, Ronald.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe Jacob, I apologize, kind of taking a step back, but so just so I'm clear, is this straw proposal, is the ask here to change what we're doing in the work group and start working through something more similar to this and not the Jade roadmap? Or what specifically is this straw proposal's objective, and what are the utilities asking the work group to consider?
At least from my perspective, I don't want to speak for all utilities. I think we view this as I said kind of before, a tangible evolution of the distribution system planning process that works to meet the intent of the order as well as the CSNA goals, and really driving towards that transparent stakeholder participation, incorporating those state policy goals within distribution system planning. So we see this as a tangible thing that the working group can recommend to implement. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot of questions to fill in the details here that we want to work through with the working group. So I don't think we're recommending necessarily this replacing Jade as the process map as a whole, but really driving this as, I think we all want to come to, tangible recommendations and tangible, evolutions of the distribution system planning process. And this is what we're putting forward as one of those evolutions of the process.
So my understanding is that the work group, the objective of the work group is to determine how DFP can be evolved. So is this the end product that you're trying to introduce at the beginning? Or there's not a lot of detail in these 6 slides. So it's just really challenging to understand what the ask is here.
Yeah, so obviously it was intentionally left broad in the sense of, I think there's more to discuss within each of these steps with the working group to really kind of define what this product looks like. But we think it's a product that helps to evolve distribution system planning, which is the intent there of the working group. It's really kind of, as Ethan kind of described earlier, it's really putting the Jade process into action in a meaningful way.
And that's what I thought the whole process of this was supposed to do through the stakeholder process. So I feel like this is, again, kind of jumping towards the end in a backwards looking fashion. But thanks for putting it together.
Well, we were similarly confused by going back to the Jade roadmap when we thought that we had covered it previously. But we're all coming at this from different perspectives, Ron, and this is a view of how the utilities think we could implement a Jade roadmap style DSP process. And yes, we're coming at it from a different perspective because we come from a world of cyclical processes where we develop our plans, cyclical reporting requirements. And so that's how we think of this kind of a process. And, for us, this will be an ongoing living process that will be continuous for decades to come if we do this correctly. So that's why we're looking at this way. And our framework is that this is the Jade in action, that this is a way to incorporate long-term CSNA goals in a way that we can add them into a long-term analysis, which is something that we felt that we were hearing from this work group that stakeholders were interested in, us incorporating both state energy goals and more long-term analysis, and then using that analysis plus stakeholder feedback to feed into our shorter-term planning. And this is going to be, you're going to have this long-term analysis that's going to feed into our load forecasting, that's going to feed into our 5-year planning, that's going to feed into our budgeting, which is going to feed into our rate cases. If you think of this as a series of concentric circles. And so, yes, we are coming at this from a different direction than you, Ron, but we're also coming at this from the direction that we as utilities have to. And that's why we wanted to put this forward, to help people understand where we're coming from and help you help us color in those blanks where, you know, we don't have a specific area that we're sure we would do, but we want to get your feedback on that. So, you know, again, we hope that you guys can help us understand what you want and fill in those blanks, which I feel like the JADE process discussion, while it has gotten admittedly bogged down, and that's been a point of discussion in some of the comments, that is where we're going with that. That's filling in the space. We're drawing the outline, and you need both to make to really get your negative and positive space.
As long as this is an outline and not a step to the end, that's, you know, this just looks like you're trying to go to the end product where we're at the beginning, and all the detail comes through walking through the JADE roadmap, in our view.
Okay, well, this is not I really encourage you to not see this as in conflict with the JADE roadmap. It was built with the JADE roadmap in mind, and I'm not exactly sure where that feeling is coming from. We began developing this before OPC suggested the JADE, going back to the JADE roadmap. We have been in discussions with other utilities for this for, you know, a month or so now, and this was a good faith effort on our part to help you all understand what we think we can do to implement this.
And I know this must be a bear for everyone who participated in the first phase. I fortunately was not part of that, but it certainly seems that the commission wants us to modify the JADE process. So I'm not sure of another way to do that. So I certainly apologize for if we're going over a lot of things you guys already talked about, but I don't necessarily see a way around it. Mr. Bartlett and then Samantha.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. And first, I want to appreciate the complexity of what the utilities have tried to do here, because having their internal structures are very complicated, and then they all tried to negotiate this together and put it together, and I accept it as a good faith-ish effort. There are a couple of points that I think we really need to address. First, I reiterate what other folks have said about, you know, we started into JADE. I think the DER discussion that we had illustrates the level of detail that we have to go into, which this approach is very high level and very general. We do need to have those discussions about each of the components of JADE in order to get more specific about what inputs are required and potentially available. The point that you raised about where does this fit into the near-term and mid-term planning process is the overall one. If you look at the document itself, and it's in the slides, the focus is on the long-term analysis, which the utilities, and the word was actually used again in this presentation, it says conceptual. We need more than conceptual. I mean, we really need the elements of what we are defining about DER forecasting and hosting capacity and all those other things to be incorporated in the as soon as possible term. The timeline we have for the greenhouse gas reduction targets of the state, the clean energy targets that are specified, numbers of EVs, amount of energy coming from solar, all of those are within the 10-year time frame, but we have to start moving to them now. So it can't just be about stakeholder participation and analysis and so on, focusing on the long term, when actually the challenge for us is how to build it into near term and midterm planning. Otherwise, it is just conceptual. And I guess the one thing that I don't really see in here, there's acknowledgement of the goals and there's promotion of the goals, but there's not that concrete commitment that we'd actually be looking for. The one thing I do see as value added in this process is that what started on slide 4 about data collection. That's something that Jay doesn't deal with in terms of participation. You know, how are we going to get that information on projections of, you know, but that comes to a very important point about rethinking what we mean by stakeholder participation. And I think actually in slide 4 and the following slide, there was some good thinking about the ways that the term stakeholders really doesn't kind of meet the need, and Empower is a utility only program, but the evolution of the transition of the energy sector, where customers themselves are going to be both consumers and producers of energy, where we're going to have more distributed energy resources around the state. That actually means that, and a lot of that investment is going to be private investment. And so there's a different role for stakeholders in this process that has to be part of the near-term and midterm processes as well, which is that they have to bring their assessments, their needs, their projections of what's going to be happening, their plans to the table as part of the planning process. And it's not just about reporting, it's about planning together. And so those are some of the elements that I reflect on this. I can't take this as a replacement framework for JADE, but I think as maybe an overarching, what Eli said when we come back to it, it's important, but I think it's also important for us to take into consideration these ideas about how different parties participate with utilities in the planning process.
All right, thank you. So we have Eli and then Jacob.
Can I just real quick? A couple of things that Al just said, and appreciate the feedback there, Al. And just want to clarify with some things talking through as you were talking there about stakeholders and the DER developers and different developers and what that looks like. That is what we want to have that conversation in that step 1, right? Recognizing that there are different types of stakeholders, and we need to have an understanding of what are DER developer plans, right? What are all those different types of plans looking like, and we want to be able to collect that during that conversation, right? So it's not just having a conversation with general stakeholders, but being able to bring that information to the table for us to then incorporate within those planning steps. And then additionally, kind of reflecting on the commitment to the state goals and everything. I think as we look at this, it's not just that step 1 and we talk about asking about state goals and what are the policy goals. I think there's a couple of things to it. One, we want to be able to look at what does this roadmap to meeting the state goals look like, right? We've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks around these time horizons and what scenarios are we looking at and everything, right? The idea behind this is let us have that look at that time horizon to meet those state goals, and what does that start to actually meaningfully look like? And we kept it broad in terms of what types of goals and incorporated that discussion into step 1, because I think we all recognize that the goals are evolving, right? And, not necessarily changing time horizons, but new goals are coming around, additional specificity within goals are being established. And so as we think about doing this type of cyclical long-term planning, it's important that we're updating what those goals are as inputs into the planning process. And so that's really what we're trying to establish within this, is in that step 1 is bringing in stakeholders, bringing in representatives from the states, from the counties, from other jurisdictional areas, bringing in developers to have that conversation that establishes what that long-term analysis starts to look like. And again, all that information starts to feed into the other cyclical planning that the utilities do.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. I just want to reinforce, it's very important to do that as part of the long-term thinking. But again, I spent most of my career doing program management in public health program management for the government. And, there's 2 kinds of long-term plans. There's long-term plans that everybody sits around and develops, and then they go on a shelf, and then everybody continues to do what they do as they were doing it. And then there are long-term plans that actually are the basis on which intermediate term plans and operational plans actually specify how they are moving towards the outcomes in the long-term plan, and they report on that. And the process has to involve continuous feedback, including from the other participants besides utilities, who are intrinsically involved in that evolution as it goes forward. So it can't just be about the long-term plan, and the long-term plan has to be the map against which progress on the other plans is measured and the plans need to aim towards. So it can't be a one-time process just focused on the long term. That's all.
All right. Thank you, sir. Eli and then Ethan.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. I largely agree with a lot of the points that Al just brought up. And I also do want to thank Jacob and Ethan for adding some key context to this presentation that I think maybe didn't come through as much in what was submitted. And so what I really appreciated that you laid out is that, you know, to a large extent, the straw man that the utilities developed was a way for the utilities to overlay the JADE map onto their processes such that this could kind of be more actionable, or at least I think that's what I heard, which I think makes a ton of sense. And I do think the straw does a good job of kind of turning the JADE roadmap into several higher level steps that, you know, better reflect, or maybe not better reflect, but that reflect utility steps in their DSP processes. But I do want to call out that I think it's the goal of this work group to determine how to modernize utility DSP processes. And the straw, I think, is just a bit higher level. It is admittedly higher level than what JADE is, and going kind of step by step within the JADE process allows us to get appropriately into some of the details of each box to understand what direction Maryland utilities need to head with respect to each category. And while I think the straw is useful, I don't know that it will be as useful specifically for the purpose of kind of going step by step and determining what is going on under the status quo, what needs to evolve, and what a path forward looks like for utilities to evolve their DSP process. So I think in a nutshell, it makes sense to continue using JADE as the primary framework to look at step by step, but maybe on occasion to revisit this straw to understand how the steps within JADE kind of what the ultimate endpoint looks like within the straw, and something to come back to certainly at the end of this when, you know, as we discussed, we wanted to come back to defining the stakeholder engagement opportunities and defining what a specific process looks like in terms of filings, meetings, stakeholder feedback, etc. And so I think through the straw, we might be able to come back to those steps. I just think it's JADE that allows us to get kind of to that right level of detail to be able to discuss the things that actually need to be changing within DSP processes in order to modernize them, which at least in my view is the goal of this work group.
All right, thank you, sir. We got Ethan and then Adam.
I say first, thank you, Eli. That is indeed the intention. This is not meant in any way to replace JADE or circumvent the process that we've already started in this work group. We just wanted to put our process cyclical world around that so you all could understand that and see how these pieces, this data collection, this stakeholder feedback, you know, these things, data, stakeholder feedback, these things are broad terms right now. We need to define them and bring them in. We define this around what we can do as utilities with cyclical processes, with reporting requirements, with rate case requirements. We also, you know, I want to say that we are very good as utilities at taking a long-term plan, a very long-term plan, and not putting it on the shelf, but actually turning it into actionable, smaller functions. I'd point you to 4 to 13 kV conversions are a common process in most utilities in the East Coast. We began those plans that we're still executing were put together by people in the 80s who have since retired, and their predecessors have since retired. We're still working those plans, modernizing them, adjusting them. That is what we do as utilities. It's extremely long-term planning and execution. So, you know, if you have concerns that we're going to take a long-term plan and not going to fold it into short-term, that is exactly what we do. We have our long-term views, we have our forecasts, we turn that into what a a prioritization, then we turn that into budgeting, and finally we turn that into annual planning of, actual construction. This is how we do our work. I hope you all can, trust that we will take your feedback. We will take these goals of the CSNA. We will do long-term forecasting to understand where the things are going, and then we will fold that into a distribution plan that is something that is actionable in the shorter term, and have plans for a broader, longer term that we will share with you through the process that we've outlined here. So thank you all for your feedback. I know this is a big leap, and we struggled with it a lot. 4 utilities sitting around a table trying to discuss how our processes each work took a lot of effort on our part, and to understand how we could all work on within this a framework was a challenge for us as well. So really appreciate your feedback on this, and understand that this is going to be, from both the JADE roadmap and the straw man point of view, this is going to take a lot of discussion among all of us. And, I'm here for the talk.
All right. Thanks, Ethan. Ethan, real quick, in terms of feedback you're looking for from everyone on the straw man, is that something you guys want to see in writing, or have you kind of gotten a flavor for what folks would like to see?
Thought we did, but always happy to get more feedback. I put a response to Samantha and Joyce in the chat that, written feedback regarding how we can flesh out this process, what kind of data, what form of stakeholder feedback you think would be preferable, and what goals should be included. These are the kind of things, let's move away from saying stakeholder, saying data, saying feedback. Let's start defining terms, and that would be very helpful for us to help fill this out, and I think also inform the JADE roadmap conversation.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I'm a little upset with what Ethan just said. I apologize, but I think, Judge McLean, you have made the point that we have limited time, and we need to keep moving forward, and to spend a lot of time and effort reflecting on this. I think we've identified some limitations with it. It does take us to a higher level. That's what happened in phase 1. We went to a higher level and we lost the detailed discussion that we needed to have. That's why we came back to JADE. I think that the points that this presentation raised about good ways to involve stakeholders are fine. Again, it can't be just at the long-term level. It has to be an ongoing participation. But anyway, I don't think we should be spending more time reflecting on this when we actually really need to keep moving forward through JADE.
Understood, sir. And I don't necessarily envision revisiting this every other week. Maybe if it, I think as Eli said, maybe down the road, when we get further into the process, we might be able to revisit it in some depth. But to the extent, and I'm not going to restrict people that want to offer feedback to the utilities on this. They can take the feedback for what it's worth, and if they want to come back and represent this at a later date, I think that'll be fine. But I completely get your point, Mr. Bartlett. All right. Anybody else? Yes. Okay. All right. Anybody else before we move on? Going back to our boxes. I think we're on the scenarios.
Hey, this is Adam from SMECO.
Yes, sir.
Maybe I can get some clarity on this. I'm a little confused because when we as a utility, when we look at system planning, there's 2 types of scenarios. We're trying to fix aging assets, or we're trying to serve new load, right? Or new capacity, or build resiliency and reliability. And just kind of based on some of the conversation we had, I'm wondering, are we mixing greenhouse gas reduction versus asset replacement, or are we looking at it from serving reliability and resiliency? And, I think of a scenario where, and when we looked at this document, we all think of a scenario where we need, for example, a new neighborhood coming online. But a lot of our system planning processes or short-term planning processes are asset replacement versus our long-term plans are usually serving new load, new capacity, building reliability and resiliency. So I guess I asked the stakeholders, are we looking at this JADE process to fix the void of asset replacement, build resiliency and reliability, or to serve capacity?
Go ahead, sir.
Wow. Adam just summarized the the tension between the vision of the responsibilities the utility have now, which is obviously critically important. Reliability, resiliency, meeting capacity is fine, but we cannot meet the energy transition goals that we need to address climate change, which is why those goals have been established, without actually transforming the grid to deal not with additional capacity, but with new forms of generation and new ways that different components of the system actually participate in the system. For example, consumers of individual solar arrays are both producers and consumers of electricity, and with FERC 2222, those things will be aggregated into the wholesale market. We're actually a little bit into the development of a new way of thinking about the electricity sector, and we have to make that transformation. So that's it. JADE has got boxes like DER and EVs and so on that will help us think through specifically some of the components that we have to address to make that transition. So there is a tension, I understand, but the answer is both. We have to both take care with the load issues, but you also have to deal with a transformation of the generation issues.
Then, Al, last time I checked, I thought all the utilities within the state are not vertically integrated. So I guess the question is, we don't have generation. Should we be conversing with the generators?
Yes, that's exactly what we want to say, that those generators need to be at the table as part of the stakeholder thing. That's exactly right. That's why it is a different relationship, because the change in generation has to be incorporated into the restructuring or the modernization, if you will, of the distribution system, which is what we're here to talk about, as I understand it.
I mean, most of the generation comes from transmission sources, and we're a distribution system planning group, so that's where I guess I struggle. But
that's changing. I mean, a 5 megawatt community solar project is a generation source. A large CNI rooftop solar array is a generation source. And those go directly into the distribution system. The individual homeowners and their battery storage that they will have, and which will be aggregated under FERC 2222, is part of the generation system. It is a new system. That's what we're trying to make that point. And I'm sorry if it's not getting through, but that's what those goals in the whole part of 7-802 of the Public Utilities Law are focused on. Is that transformation. So we need to do both. We don't want to undermine, we need to preserve reliability and resiliency and look at cost. All of those things are important considerations, but we have to make the transformation. And that's what our job is, I believe, in this working group.
Samantha and then Jorge.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just going to respond directly to the question with some examples again from other states. And I think it's important to point out that one of the outputs of integrated distribution system planning processes is often an identification of quote unquote grid needs. And I think that comes up in the JADE process as well. So, based on an analysis of forecasts and scenarios, yada, yada, the output is, okay, here's what we expect quote unquote grid needs to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever time frame you want. And those grid needs are often defined as, all the things Adam mentioned. So for example, capacity, voltage support, resiliency, reliability. And then from there, it's a discussion about how will those needs be met? Will it be through, proactive investments by utilities? Will it be through non-wire solutions, et cetera?
All right. Thank you, Samantha. Jorge.
Yeah, I want to agree. I want to highlight Al's point in regards to taking into consideration as an input the resources from the bulk power system. That demarcation between distribution and transmission is getting more fuzzy over time. I was part of an effort where the National Electrical Safety Code, which covers the bulk power system, is exploring how it is that it's going to incorporate the National Electrical Code, which is more about the distribution system. So moving forward, part of the distribution system plan is to look at how it is that those two components of the grid are eventually going to talk to each other more often. That demarcation is getting grayer and grayer over time. And I just want to highlight that I agree with all in regards to that issue.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Well, as far as I know, currently, do we have anybody from any bulk power or transmission operators in the work group? To my knowledge, we don't. And if so, at one point, do we need to bring them in or try to bring them in?
I think we should reach out. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think to Jorge's kind of initial concept there, that was a discussion of code, right? We're still dealing with separation of distribution and transmission systems. We're focused here on distribution system planning, recognizing fully Al's point, distributed generation is growing, right? And obviously that is what we're here to talk about and continuing to look at. And that fits within the realm of, I think, distribution system planning, but I think it's important still to differentiate the difference between the bulk planning system and planning for that and planning for the distribution system.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, and obviously the commission really doesn't have any authority over the bulk generators. And while we do approve transmission lines, it's really more of a PJM function. All right. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in? Okay. All right. It's 5:12. Why don't we plan on taking lunch right now, and we'll plan on coming back at 12:30, and we'll pick up with the third bullet, scenarios and projections, and hopefully we can finish out block 1 today. All right. All right. And I've got a note to start the recording when we come back. So, all right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you at 12:30.
Thanks.